At 6:45 on November 2nd, 1943, Major Raymond Wilkins flew 8 B-25 Mitchells straight toward Rabaul, just as Japanese radar screens lit up across the island. Wilkins was 26 years old. It was his 87th combat mission. He was the last man still flying from the original 3rd Bombardment Group that had arrived in the Southwest Pacific in early 1942. Every other crew he had trained with was gone, shot down over New Guinea, lost at sea, burned into jungle hillsides, or simply vanished on long-range strikes that never came back. Below him waited the most heavily defended base in the Pacific, Rabaul, a volcanic fortress bristling with 367 anti-aircraft guns and protected by nearly 400 Japanese fighters spread across 5 airfields. Overnight, things had become worse. Carrier aircraft from Zuikaku, Shokaku, and Zuho had arrived the day before. Their pilots were already warming engines. 3 hours earlier, the briefing room had been silent. Gray-faced crews listened as intelligence officers laid it out plainly. Japanese cruisers and destroyers were anchored in Simpson Harbor, supporting enemy operations against Bougainville, where U.S. Marines had landed just 2 days earlier. If those ships sailed, the invasion could fail. They had to be destroyed in harbor. The briefing officer ended with a single sentence. "Not all of you will be coming home." Wilkins didn't need the warning. By nightfall, 45 airmen would be dead or missing. He knew how the math worked. Survival stopped being about skill after enough missions. Eventually, probability caught up with everyone. Wilkins led the formation across the Solomon Sea, his B-25 Fifi riding low and steady. Fuel was good. Engines ran smooth. The aircraft had been modified at Eagle Farm in Australia, part of a brutal evolution born from failure. Standard B-25s couldn't survive low-level ship attacks, so mechanics stripped out bombardier positions and replaced them with forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns, for in the nose, for more mounted in external pods along the fuselage. Enough firepower to pour 800 rounds per second into a target. The idea was simple. Fly at masthead height, suppress deck guns with machine gun fire, skip bombs into the hull below the waterline, get out before fighters arrived. It had taken months to refine the technique. Most of the men who figured it out were dead. Japanese radar stations had already detected them. Rabaul had at least 30 minutes warning. Fighters would be climbing now. Anti-aircraft crews were manning every gun pit, rooftop mount, and hillside battery around the harbor. Wilkins held altitude and heading. 7 Mitchells stayed tight behind him, crews who trusted him because he was still alive. They called Rabaul the Pearl Harbor of the South Pacific, a natural deep-water harbor surrounded by volcanic peaks, capable of holding hundreds of ships. Concrete bunkers housed command centers. Radar stations tracked every approach. More anti-aircraft guns defended this single base than Darwin and Port Moresby combined. 5th Air Force Intelligence rated it the most dangerous target they had ever faced. The coastline appeared ahead, dark jungle slamming into bright blue water. Wilkins pushed the nose down. 100 feet. Salt spray struck the windshield. The formation tightened. The harbor mouth opened before them, and inside it, ships packed the anchorage. Destroyers, transports, cruisers. More targets than Wilkins had seen in months. Then the first gun fired. A heavy shell burst 200 yards ahead, black smoke hanging in the air like a warning. Then everything opened up. All 367 guns concentrated on 8 aircraft flying straight at them at treetop height. Wilkins shoved the throttles forward and dropped to 70 feet. His thumb squeezed the trigger. At 500 yards, 8 50-caliber guns roared. Tracers slammed into a Japanese destroyer. Brass casings filled the cockpit. The ship's deck erupted as steel and men were torn apart. 400 yards. Japanese gunners answered back. 20mm cannon fire from the destroyer. Heavier shells from shore batteries. The air became solid with metal. The B-25 shuddered as rounds punched through wings and fuselage. Wilkins didn't flinch. He held the trigger down. 200 yards. The bombs released. 2 500-pounders skipped across the harbor like stones. Wilkins yanked the Mitchell upward. The first bomb struck below the waterline near the engine room. The second hit amidships. Both detonated. The destroyer split open. Secondary explosions ripped through the hull as magazines cooked off. Wilkins was already climbing and banking left when the controls went soft. Something was wrong. The aircraft responded sluggishly. He looked back. The vertical stabilizer was gone, shredded by flak. Hydraulic fluid streamed from ruptured lines. The Mitchell wanted to roll hard right. Wilkins fought it, forcing the crippled aircraft level. Behind him, the other B-25s pressed in. Another destroyer took hits. A transport erupted in flame. Then the fighters arrived. Zeros screamed in from altitude, fast and merciless. Wilkins saw one Mitchell explode in midair as cannon fire found its fuel tanks. No parachutes. The wreckage hit the harbor at full speed. Anti-aircraft fire intensified. The Japanese had plotted the escape route. Shells burst in perfect patterns. Another B-25 rolled inverted and shattered on the water. Wilkins counted. 6 aircraft left. His engines were still running. Oil pressure was holding. One engine was running hot. Hydraulics were gone. If he made it home, the landing gear would have to be cranked down by hand. A heavy cruiser loomed ahead, bigger, armed with heavier guns, already tracking his wingmen. Wilkins had a choice: break off and escape, or make another run. Standard procedure said leave. The mission was already a success. He'd survived 87 missions by knowing when to get out. But the cruiser was lining up his people. If someone didn't suppress those guns, more Mitchells would die. Wilkins looked at his co-pilot, a kid on his 3rd mission, eyes locked forward, waiting. Wilkins made his decision. He shoved the throttles forward and turned toward the cruiser. They had no bombs left, only guns. And no one had ever survived what he was about to do. This would be a gun run. No bombs. No margin for error. The goal wasn't to sink the cruiser, just to pull its fire away from the retreating bombers. Draw every gun. Give the others a chance to escape. The cruiser was 800 yards ahead. Wilkins dropped to 50 feet. With the vertical stabilizer gone, the B-25 no longer flew clean. Every correction came from throttle and rudder. The aircraft vibrated violently, metal screaming under stress. 600 yards. The cruiser's guns swung toward him. Every mount opened fire at once. 40 millimeters, 25 millimeters, heavy machine guns. The volume of fire was overwhelming. Tracers didn't streak anymore. They formed a wall. Wilkins flew straight into it. 500 yards. The windshield shattered. Glass exploded into the cockpit. Shards cut his face and hands. Something slammed into his left arm. Hot, numbing pain. Blood soaked his sleeve. He didn't let go of the trigger. The cruiser's deck vanished beneath the impact of 8.50 caliber guns. Gun crews dove for cover. Others were simply erased where they stood. 400 yards. The aircraft began coming apart. New holes tore open in the wings. The number 2 engine coughed, shuddered. 300 yards. This was the point where bombers usually died. Wilkins held the trigger down. At 200 yards, the superstructure filled his windscreen. Bullets tore through the bridge. Windows blew out. Metal peeled away in strips. 100 yards. He released the trigger and hauled back. The crippled tail fought him. He forced the nose up with engine power alone. The B-25 skimmed over the cruiser's mast, 20 feet to spare. Smoke poured from the number 2 engine. Oil pressure collapsed. Cylinder head temperature pegged red. But he had done it. The cruiser's guns were locked on him. Behind him, he saw it. 5 B-25s climbing clear of Rabaul. They were getting out. That was the mission. The price came immediately. The number 2 engine seized. The propeller windmilled uselessly. Wilkins feathered it and trimmed the aircraft. Single-engine flight. Over Rabaul. Japanese fighters were waiting. 3 Zeros dove from above. Wilkins couldn't maneuver. His top turret gunner fired upward, tracers clawing at the sky. 1 Zero broke away. Another came straight down the center line. Cannon shells ripped through the fuselage. The radio operator's position took a direct hit. Screaming over the intercom, then silence. The Zero flashed past. More fighters arrived. 4, 6, 8. Carrier Air Group pilots. Fresh. Aggressive. A single crippled bomber was easy prey. Wilkins couldn't outrun them. His last engine was already at maximum power. Drag from the shredded airframe bled speed constantly. Another Zero attacked from port. The waist gunner fired. Rounds struck the fighter's wing root. Sparks. But the Japanese pilot pressed in. 20 millimeters cannon fire punched through the left wing. Fuel sprayed from a ruptured tank. The self-sealing liner failed. Raw aviation fuel streamed across the wing surface. One tracer would turn the aircraft into a fireball. Wilkins shoved the nose down. Altitude traded for speed, but that brought him closer to the anti-aircraft guns below. No good options left. The harbor exit was still 2 miles ahead. Japanese fighters swarmed methodically, professionals finishing a kill. One pass damaged the rudder. Another shot away the left aileron. The B-25 was barely flying. More debris than aircraft, held together by speed and will. Wilkins checked his gauges. Fuel pressure fluctuating. Oil temperature climbing. Asymmetric lift pulling the aircraft sideways. He compensated with rudder and throttle. His wounded arm throbbed violently. They crossed the coastline. Open water. That meant a chance. The Zeros attacked again, 3 directions at once. The top turret fell silent. Either the gunner was dead or out of ammunition. The waist gunner still fired, short bursts now, conserving the last rounds. More hits. The number 1 engine coughed, sputtered, caught again. Not for long. Wilkins smelled fuel in the cockpit. Warning lights glowed everywhere. Hydraulics gone. Electrical system failing. Oil pressure collapsing. 2 choices remained. Try to reach friendly territory 50 miles away, or ditch while he still had control. The engine decided for him. It quit. Silence, except wind and fighters. Wilkins trimmed for best glide. 90 knots. Maybe 3 or 4 miles. The Zeros kept attacking. Another burst of cannon fire tore through the fuselage. Wilkins keyed the intercom. Gear up. Flaps up. Parallel to the swells. The co-pilot acknowledged. The waist gunner didn't. The water rushed up, dark blue turning green. Swells about 4 feet. Wilkins lined it up. The B-25 glided remarkably well for an aircraft missing half its tail. 500 feet. 300, 100. The Mitchell hit the water at 90 knots. The nose dug in. Water exploded over the cockpit. Wilkins slammed forward against his harness. Metal shrieked. The fuselage buckled. The aircraft slewed sideways and began tearing itself apart. Cold water poured through the shattered windshield. Wilkins released his harness. His left arm wouldn't move. The co-pilot fought his own straps, blood running down his face. The bomber sank fast, nose down. Water covered the instrument panel. Wilkins forced himself upward, found the overhead escape hatch. It wouldn't move. The frame had warped. They pulled together. Nothing. Water rose to their chests. The tail was already under. One more pull. The hatch shifted barely. Wilkins shoved the co-pilot up first. The kid disappeared through the opening. Wilkins followed, dragging himself with one arm. Halfway through, the aircraft lurched violently. He fell back into the cockpit. Water swallowed him. Blind. Drowning. He found the hatch by feel and clawed upward again. His lungs burned. The bomber pulled him down with it. Then air. Wilkins broke the surface, gasping. The co-pilot was nearby, swimming. The B-25's tail stood nearly vertical for a moment. Then it slid under. Bubbles marked the end. The last aircraft of the original 3rd Bombardment Group was gone. Wilkins kicked to stay afloat. His wounded arm hung useless. Blood clouded the water. He looked for survivors. Saw none. A Zero circled overhead. Low. One came in for a pass. Wilkins waited for the gunfire. The gunfire never came. The Zero flew past Wilkins and waggled its wings. A salute. Then the fighter climbed away and turned back toward Rabaul. The others followed. The sky emptied. Wilkins floated. The co-pilot swam closer and asked if he was all right. Wilkins didn't answer. He couldn't. The blood loss was catching up to him now. His vision narrowed. The edges went gray. The co-pilot grabbed him under the arms and tried to keep his head above water. 2 men. No raft. No rescue aircraft. No ships nearby. 50 miles from friendly territory. They stayed afloat for 40 minutes, maybe less. Wilkins was heavy. His flight suit was soaked. Every movement pulled them both lower in the water. The co-pilot fought it as long as he could, but exhaustion won. He had to choose. Hold on and drown with him. Or let go. He let go. Wilkins slipped beneath the surface for the final time. 26 years old. 87 combat missions. The last man still flying from the 3rd Bombardment Group's original cruise of February 1942. His body was never recovered. The Pacific kept him. Later, intelligence officers reconstructed the mission from radio intercepts, gun camera footage, and survivor testimony. 2 ships sunk. 1 heavy cruiser neutralized. Cruiser guns suppressed during the withdrawal phase. 5 B-25 saved. The numbers went into after-action reports. Typed. Filed. Cross-referenced. Wilkins never knew the full results. He died believing he had done his job. That was enough. The Medal of Honor came later. Posthumous. His family in California received it. The woman in Australia he planned to marry learned he wasn't coming back. The co-pilot was rescued 3 days later by a U.S. Navy patrol boat. Dehydrated. Sunburned. Barely conscious. He told the story. How Wilkins could have withdrawn after the first ship. How he turned back toward the cruiser. How he drew fire so the others could escape. How he fought the aircraft all the way to the water. His testimony became part of the official record. Over Rabaul, the fight continued. 5 B-25s from Wilkins' formation scattered, each running independently. Japanese fighters swarmed. Anti-aircraft fire tracked the exits. More men died before the day ended. But something had changed. The heavy cruiser Wilkins attacked stopped firing. Gun crews were regrouping, repairing damage, recovering from the strafing run. Those minutes mattered. Time measured in seconds. Lives measured in those seconds. 1 B-25 escaped with 3 engines shot out, flying home on one. Another absorbed 72 hits and landed without hydraulics, running off the runway. The crew walked away. A third ditched 20 miles offshore and was picked up by PT boats. 5 aircraft made it back to Allied airspace by 10:30 a.m. 1 trailed smoke. 1 flew with half its tail missing. 1 ran on a single engine. The last looked intact, until ground crews counted over 300 holes. They landed at WWII, New Guinea. Medics pulled wounded men from turrets and waist positions. 3 were dead, 7 wounded. The rest were silent. They had watched Wilkins go down. Some had seen the co-pilot in the water. No one saw Wilkins surface. Debriefings began immediately. Results mattered more than grief. How many ships destroyed? How much damage inflicted? Did the mission succeed? The crews answered methodically. Destroyer, sunk. Heavy cruiser, dead in the water, fires visible. Second destroyer, broken in half, sinking. Transport, burning at the docks, secondary explosions. The officers took notes. Cross-checked testimony built the picture. 8 B-25s lost. 9 P-38s shot down. 45 airmen dead or missing. The bloodiest single-day 5th Air Force had suffered. But the objective was achieved. Japanese ships stayed in harbor. No sortie against Bougainville. The Marines held their beachhead. Strategic victory. Tactical massacre. One crew's story stood apart. Sergeant Dick Walker, 13th Bombardment Squadron. Same group as Wilkins. Different squadron. Walker's formation reached the harbor entrance under heavy fire. Fighters were scrambling. The squadron commander was supposed to lead the attack. He didn't. At the last moment, the commander broke formation and turned back toward New Guinea. No explanation. No radio call. 7 B-25s followed him away from the target. Walker couldn't accept it. He broke formation alone. 1 aircraft. 1 crew. Against Simpson Harbor. He came in at masthead height. Picked a merchant ship. Locked on. Anti-aircraft fire was worse than predicted. Tracers filled the air. Walker flew straight through it. His aircraft took hits immediately. Wing, fuselage, tail. He kept going. 500 yards. 400. 300. Guns hammering. The ship's deck shredded. 2 bombs released. Both hit below the waterline. The vessel buckled and began to sink. Zeros came after him. 6. 8. Maybe more. Walker fought them off with violent maneuvers and gunfire. His aircraft survived. He landed at WWII 90 minutes after Wilkins went down. 43 holes. Minor wounds. The confrontation happened that afternoon. Walker and other crews demanded answers from their commander. They got none. 5th Air Force handled it quietly. The commander and operations officer were removed and sent stateside. No court-martial. No public record. The incident vanished into classified files. Japanese fighter strength dropped immediately after November 2nd. 18 Zeros were confirmed destroyed. 12 more were damaged beyond repair. These were not replacement pilots rushed through abbreviated training. They were carrier-qualified aviators from Zuikaku, Shokaku, and Zuho, men with years of experience. By late 1943, Japan could no longer replace losses like that. Every pilot killed was permanent. American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications within days. Rabaul Command described the November 2nd raid as the most aggressive air attack they had experienced since the base was established. Low-level skip bombing had proven devastating. Ships at anchor were vulnerable. Harbor defenses were penetrable. Morale was shaken. More importantly, Japanese planners reached a strategic conclusion. Rabaul was no longer secure for major fleet operations. By November 10th, the combined fleet carrier air groups were withdrawn. Aircraft were redeployed to truck. The risk of losing more irreplaceable pilots outweighed Rabaul's remaining value. The fortress still existed. Its offensive power did not. At Bougainville, the effect was immediate. No cruiser bombardments. No destroyer sorties against supply convoys. No naval interference with the beachhead. The Marines expanded their perimeter. By mid-November, 3 divisions were ashore. Artillery followed. Tanks. Ammunition. The invasion held and grew. The strategic exchange was clear. 45 American airmen killed. 7 Japanese ships destroyed or disabled. 1 major enemy base neutralized. The numbers appeared clean in official histories. Statistics without faces. But the survivors remembered the names. Wilkins, the radio operator lost in the ditching. The waist gunner who never surfaced. 38 pilots who vanished over water. The war advanced. The dead did not. 5th Air Force began reviewing Wilkins' actions immediately. Multiple witnesses confirmed the sequence. 2 ships destroyed. A heavy cruiser suppressed. A squadron saved during withdrawal. The decision to attack again despite catastrophic damage. The final strafing run made without bombs. The deliberate choice to draw enemy fire. The criteria for the Medal of Honor were exacting. Conspicuous gallantry. Risk of life above and beyond duty. Direct engagement with enemy forces. Wilkins met every requirement. His squadron commander submitted the recommendation on November 5th, 3 days after the mission. Supporting statements followed. The paperwork moved upward. Group, Wing, 5th Air Force Headquarters. General George Kenney reviewed it personally. Kenney rejected most Medal of Honor recommendations. The standard was high. This one was different. He approved it on November 20th. The recommendation reached Washington in December. Chief of Staff George Marshall signed off. President Franklin Roosevelt gave final approval in January 1944. The award was posthumous. Wilkins' family received the telegram in February. The medal came later, presented in California. His parents accepted it. His younger brother stood beside them. The woman in Australia was not notified officially. She learned through unofficial channels. A letter from Wilkins arrived 2 months after his death. It spoke of plans after the war. Medical school, returning to California, or staying in Australia. A future that never happened. The letter was folded and kept with photographs and service records. In the Southwest Pacific, the war continued. More raids followed, November 5th, November 11th. Smaller formations. Heavier defenses. Higher losses. But something had changed. American crews knew Rabaul could be hit. The fortress was no longer untouchable. Morale improved despite the cost. November 2nd became a reference point. The day 5th Air Force proved it could strike the hardest target in theater. Dick Walker completed his tour. He survived the war. His testimony later verified what happened that morning, who pressed the attack and who turned away. The 3rd Bombardment Group received a Distinguished Unit Citation. Group-level recognition. Living and dead alike. The citation described the mission in sterile language. Targets. Opposition. Results. It did not describe the smoke, the fire, or the water filling a cockpit. The tactical lessons spread quickly. Skip bombing became standard doctrine by December 1943. Every B-25 squadron received training. Forward-firing guns became production standard. Wilkins' aircraft, damaged, improvised, lethal, became the template. Approach angles were refined. 50 feet worked. 40 feet was suicide. Knowledge bought with blood was passed on. Rabaul remained on maps through early 1944, but it no longer mattered. Heavy ships were gone. The base was bypassed. Isolated. Starved. The fortress never fell. It didn't need to. November 2nd marked the beginning of its irrelevance. The 3rd Bombardment Group flew until 1945. None of the original crews remained. Wilkins had been the last. His death closed that chapter. The B-25 Mitchell went on to become one of the most produced bombers of the war. Nearly 10,000 built. Ground attack. Anti-shipping. Reconnaissance. Wilkins died in an early model. Later versions carried the lessons he paid for. His family remained private. No speeches. No interviews. Eventually, his brother donated his effects to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. The display is small. A medal, a photograph, a paragraph. Most visitors walk past. There are too many stories. But November 2nd, 1943, still exists in the record. A morning when one damaged bomber turned back and didn't return. There were too many heroes. That was the problem. Individual sacrifices blurred together unless someone stopped long enough to read names instead of numbers. Veterans of the 3rd Bombardment Group held reunions after the war. Annual gatherings at first. They talked about aircraft, missions, places. And always, they talked about the men who didn't come back. Wilkins' name was never skipped. A toast. A pause. Then conversation resumed. The reunions grew smaller through the 1950s and 1960s. By the 1970s, attendance barely justified the effort. Travel was harder. Men were older. Some were gone. Dick Walker attended several. He told his story when asked, about the commander who turned away, about breaking formation alone, about seeing Wilkins go down. He never dramatized it, just stated what happened. Walker died in 1998. Heart attack. 76 years old. His obituary mentioned military service in one paragraph. No details. The co-pilot who survived the ditching with Wilkins never spoke publicly. After the war, he left the Air Force. Became a teacher. Married. Raised children. When students asked about his service, he said only that he flew in the Pacific. Nothing about Rabaul. Nothing about the water. Nothing about watching his pilot sink. The memory stayed private until his death in 2003. The woman in Australia moved on. She married, had a family, lived a full life. But she kept Wilkins' letters, the ones written before November 2nd. Descriptions of missions. Thoughts about the war. Plans for after. The last letter arrived in January 1944. By then, she already knew he was dead. She read it anyway. One letter stood out. Dated October 28th, for days before Rabaul. Wilkins wrote that he felt his luck was running out. 86 missions. Everyone else from his original group gone. He knew the statistics. Nobody beat them forever. But he also wrote about responsibility, about men depending on him, about finishing the job. The letter ended with a promise. When he reached his 100th mission, he would request reassignment, come back to Australia, and begin the life they planned. He never reached Mission 88. The promise ended in the Pacific. Today, modern Air Force officers study the Rabaul raids in professional military education courses. Case studies. Tactical innovation. Leadership under fire. Acceptable losses versus mission accomplishment. Wilkins appears as an example of commitment and sacrifice. The analysis is clinical. There is no room for grief and doctrine. The statistics tell one story. 7 ships destroyed or disabled. Japanese naval operations disrupted. Bougainville protected. Strategic objectives achieved. 45 American airmen killed. Acceptable losses by wartime standards. Mission successful. But numbers don't explain why Wilkins turned back. Raymond Wilkins was 26 years old. He had survived 86 missions when most crews didn't survive 20. He was planning medical school, marriage, a life after the war. He gave all of that up in the final moments over Simpson Harbor. The decision was not complex. His squadron was withdrawing. The cruiser was tracking them. Someone needed to draw fire. Wilkins could have kept flying. No one would have blamed him. His aircraft was already crippled. Mission complete. Withdrawal authorized. Instead, he turned back. Not because orders required it. Not because doctrine demanded it. Because 5 B-25s full of men were in danger, and he could help. 1 aircraft against 5. 1 crew against 5 crews. The exchange only made sense if you valued others more than yourself. That is what the Medal of Honor recognizes. Not bravery alone. Thousands were brave. Not mission completion. That was expected. It recognizes the moment when survival is surrendered so others can live. Wilkins made that choice 800 yards from a Japanese heavy cruiser. The 5 B-25s he protected all made it back. Damaged. Shot through. But flying. 25 men survived who might not have. Some flew more missions. Some rotated home. All carried Wilkins' name with them. One pilot named his son Raymond. Another kept Wilkins' photograph in his logbook for 40 years. A third visited Wilkins' parents in California after the war and told them what the telegram could not. The tactics Wilkins used became doctrine. Skip bombing at masthead level spread across the Pacific. Thousands of missions were flown using methods refined by men who learned under fire. Ships were sunk from Rabaul to the Philippines, from New Guinea to Okinawa. The method worked because men like Wilkins proved it could and paid the price. His B-25 Fifi never flew again. It rests on the Pacific floor, 50 miles from Rabaul. Corroded now. Aluminum gone. Steel eaten away by salt. But it did what it was meant to do. 2 ships destroyed. A squadron saved. That was enough. Wilkins' parents never recovered. They attended ceremonies. Accepted the medal. Displayed it proudly. But no decoration replaces a son. They lived another 20 years with that absence. The 87 missions Wilkins flew represent 87 times he could have died and didn't. Skill, discipline, and luck kept him alive until they didn't. Maybe luck ran out. Maybe fate decided. Or maybe he simply reached the moment every combat pilot understands is coming. You cannot fly forever. Statistics make sure of that. Wilkins knew it. He wrote about it. He felt it before November 2nd. And he flew anyway. Because someone had to. That is the real story of Rabaul. Not the ships. Not the tactics. Not the statistics. It is about ordinary men doing extraordinary things because walking away was something they could not live with. Major Raymond Harold Wilkins died that morning doing exactly that. His aircraft sank 2 ships, saved his squadron, and then took him with it. 26 years old. Medal of Honor recipient. Last man from the original 3rd Bombardment Group. That is not legend. That is record.